What's going on, you guys? It's your least favorite YouTuber, SirDoom285, and today the time has come. Today I'm going to be ranking all of the Marvel Cinematic Universe movies that I have seen from the worst to the best. Yes, I'm updating this. Now, because I haven't seen Black Panther Wakanda Forever yet, it's not going to be on the list. But as of now, are you guys up for the challenge? Are you ready to drop down your ranking of the MCU movies that you have seen in the comments below? Let me know. Remember, this is all subjective. My list isn't the right list. It's just my personal list based on my own subjective opinions. We are all going to disagree, and that is perfectly fine. But without further ado, let's dive into my updated ranking of all of the Marvel Cinematic Universe movies, all 29 of them now, from the worst to the best, from my least favorite to my absolute favorite. Number 29, Eternals. Now, this is going to be a very polarizing choice because you're going to have either people who absolutely agree with me or people who absolutely disagree with me, because Eternals is possibly the most divisive film in the entire MCU. And I will say this, on my second rewatch, it was better than my first. And to be fair, I think every MCU film and show is at the very least decent. And Eternals, I think, is a decent film. In fact, I think the acting is really, really good. Especially Gemma Chan is, seriously. I think the visuals are outstanding. And there is a simple but straightforward and good explanation for why the Eternals haven't been present in previous films. However, I don't think the story was all that well executed. I think it was quite confusing and not all that interesting, especially with the fact you have 10 new characters being introduced all at once, and the development between each of them was uneven. I think Cersei and Icarus got the most uh, development, but I think half of the Eternals themselves, I actually forgot their names. So Eternals, while I don't think it feels out of place in the MCU, I think it's a decent film, just not one I'd rewatch often. But if you love it, I'm happy for you. Just, I like it, but I don't love it. Number 28, The Incredible Hulk. This is another one that I think is very polarizing. You're going to have people who strongly agree with me, but also people who say this film is actually very underappreciated or underrated. And make no mistake, I do think The Incredible Hulk is a good film, but I don't think it's great. While I will say it has been somewhat enhanced for me after She-Hulk, for me, it's just never been one of my favorites. Make no mistake, I think the acting is very good, especially from Edward Norton, Liv Tyler, and William Hurt. May William Hurt rest in peace. And the comedy I do think lands whenever there is some comedy, and the action is pretty good. However, I'm gonna give a bit of my hot take. I don't enjoy the third act battle between Hulk and Abomination that much. And it mostly comes down to going way too long to the point where I'm yelling at the screen, the punches aren't working, try something else. And it was longer than I think it should have been, and some of the CGI was very hit or miss. And while I do think the story was better than I expected, in hindsight, I don't think it gives a good sense of Bruce Banner's personality. Sure, you get his backstory and how he became the Hulk in those first few minutes, but a lot of things feel underdeveloped. I think his personality was underdeveloped to the point where I feel I don't really know him. But that's just my take. Incredible Hulk, good, but not great. Number 27, Doctor Strange. Now, this is another one that has been somewhat enhanced for me a little after the sequel came out. And you can probably notice, compared to my last ranking of the MCU films, that this has been bumped up to the point where I put it above The Incredible Hulk. But I'm still not the biggest fan of the original Doctor Strange. And kind of like Eternals, it has very good acting, especially from Benedict Cumberbatch and Tilda Swinton, and the visual effects are amazing. The problem with this film, well, I would say there are three big problems. I wasn't in love with the story, and it might be the most uninteresting origin in the MCU for me. I also thought, despite Benedict Cumberbatch's great acting, Stephen Strange himself was kind of unlikable. They made him too arrogant to the point where when he's being knocked out by the Ancient One, I'm like, serves you right for being too arrogant. And I'm just like, why would I want to root for this guy? Another big problem is that the supporting characters didn't feel very interesting. Rachel McAdams is a good actress, but she wasn't given that much to do as Christine, and she just felt like a blank slate just to give the hero a love interest, which you don't always have to do. Reference Logan. And also, now, I'm usually a major defender of the comedy in the MCU and the humor. However, this is one of those few times where I have to say, yeah, the humor was pretty lackluster. The one time I did probably laugh was in the third act, where Doctor Strange is going up to Dormammu and he says, Dormammu, I've come to bargain, and keeps turning back time. That was funny. And that was probably something that it has over the Incredible Hulk for me now. The third act, in my opinion, is better. So that's it for me. Look, if you love Doctor Strange and you think it's kind of underrated, great. I wish I could be a bigger fan of this film, but unfortunately, I just think it's good, but not great. Number 26, Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2. Now, I know for a fact that this one is going to make a lot of people unhappy because, in my opinion, prior to Eternals, Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2 was the most polarizing film in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. Because you have people who absolutely love this movie, but you also have people who just couldn't care less about this film. And I'll be honest, when I initially saw it, I was actually in the camp who really liked Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2 and thought it was kind of underrated. Though that might have to do with the fact that this movie was extremely funny and coming off of Doctor Strange, which had pretty lackluster humor. That was pretty much what meant to me, or that meant to me. But the more I rewatched it and the more I thought about it, I started to like it less. To the point where I feel like in the future it might actually get bumped down. We'll see how Guardians 3 does. But in a way, you could say my relationship with the Guardians of the Galaxy films has been somewhat similar to a lot of people's relationship with the Thor films. So you can imagine which Thor film this is the equivalent of for me. And the reason why Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2 has faltered this low is because the majority of the characters are a bunch of big idiots. You see, the plot of this film had to start moving forward because Rocket had to be the stupidest raccoon to walk the earth. He stole batteries just because he wanted to? That's the stupidest reason ever. And sure, he can argue that they were easy to steal, but so? That doesn't mean you have to steal them. And there's a lot of stuff. The humor felt pretty dry now that I come to think of it. Not to mention, a lot of the characters were quite unlikable. Rocket, again, when Groot is being tortured by the Ravengers and all he is doing is laughing how stupid Taserface's name is. And yeah, Taserface's name is a stupid name, but come on, Groot is your friend, Rocket. And this is also frustrating because at the same time, Groot is extremely cute, and I love Zoe Saldana as an actress, and I love her as Gamora, and she is definitely one of the best parts. Actually, I would say she is the best part of both of these films, and I do like her relationship with Star-Lord. That is another saving grace. I think they do have a good relationship, and that brings the down to earth side of Star Lord out more. And I get what James Gunn was trying to do with the father son stuff, with the he may have been your father boy, but he wasn't your daddy. But I feel like Yondu's death and him saying that didn't hit me as hard because we only really got scenes in these two films of Yondu kind of being this jerk to Star Lord to the point where I didn't really care. And Drax was just as annoying. Mantis, unfortunately, wasn't given much to do, and I think the story is kind of all over the place. Look, if you love Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2, great, but please, please, please don't be a jerk to anyone who doesn't hold this film in high regard. Number 25, For the Dark World. Now, as I've been going through my bottom four, you've probably been thinking to yourself, wait a minute, where is For the Dark World? Surely it can't be better than all these other films. Well, in my opinion, it kind of is, and that leads me to my number 25, aka For the Dark World. Now, I think this will forever be the weakest of the four films, hence why it's this low. People can say what they like about Thor Love and Thunder, which I'll be getting to, but I think For the Dark World will remain the weakest just because it's the one I won't rewatch the most. With that said, I do think this is actually a really good film, and I think it's a tad bit overhated. Now, I completely agree that Malekith is a completely poor villain, and there might have been too much action, if you ask me, so then there wasn't enough time for character moments. And the Warriors 3 were unfortunately a bit sidelined because I really enjoyed them in the first film. With that said, I think a lot of the rest of the stuff make more than make up for that, which I think is what For the Dark World has above the films below it. And people can argue, but Malekith was a poor villain, which I would agree. Except the protagonist Thor, he was still likable, and Chris Hemsworth's performance was still great. Natalie Portman also really good as Jane. I still cared about Thor and his relationship with his parents, his brother, and Jane. And again, going back to one of my criticisms of Guardians 2, the fact you did have some good scenes between Thor and his mother, Frigga, and her being a good, made her death impactful. And I think if there's one thing people will come around to my opinion on this film is that the Thor and Loki dynamic was really good, and you do get a sense that they do care about each other, even if they can't fully trust each other. And again, the emotional scenes I think still landed for me. And even if this is the most serious of the four films and there wasn't enough as much comedy compared to the rest, when there was, it still landed for me. So those are my thoughts on For the Dark World. That is why I think, while I don't think it's great, I still think this is a pretty good film and a tad bit overhated. Number 24. Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness. Now let's be real, there are two types of people in this world. You either have people who prefer the first Doctor Strange over the second, or people who prefer the second Doctor Strange over the first. As you can tell, I am firmly in the latter, even though I technically shouldn't, because, and I'm going to be honest with you, this might make me a lot of enemies, but I feel I should have actually mentioned this when I was ranking the Spider-Man films. I am not really a Sam Raimi fan. I don't really enjoy his films. I think only on the rare occasion I do, with most, maybe well, actually, the first Spider-Man he did, and this film. But other than that, and that goes into why I'm not really a Sam Raimi fan. Horror isn't exactly a genre I enjoy too much. So when they announced he was going to direct this and that it was going to be more horror-like, I was like, if they give him more free reign, like with Spider-Man 2, how is this supposed to bump up the Doctor Strange franchise, in my opinion? So it was actually a surprise that Multiverse of Madness, not that I didn't want it to be better than the first one, I did, but the fact that it was, I was like, yes, a dream come true, but also a surprise. So here's why, despite me not being really a Sam Raimi fan, as well as not really a horror guy, this film is above the first Doctor Strange for me. I feel like Doctor Strange himself was more likable, which is a good sign. So it's like, all right, Strange can carry his own film, because I used to think he works better when he's in other people's films as opposed to in his own, which I still believe that, but this one was like, okay, he can carry his own film. So that's number one. Number two, the supporting characters were more interesting. Christine actually felt like she had a purpose to be in this film, unlike in the first one. Not to mention more Wong screen time, which is great. Love Wong. I felt Scarlet Witch was a better villain than Matt Mikkelsen's character in the first one. And yes, there wasn't as much multiverse madness. That's probably a knock I'll take against this film. But other than that, I think it was a good film. The emotional scenes I think landed. I wouldn't call this film great, but I do think it's really good. And depending on who you ask, I would say, well, I don't have it as a top tier, as you can see. I don't think it's as bad as some people make it out to be. Number 23. Guardians of the Galaxy. Now, I know for a fact that this is a lot of people's favorite MCU film. I mean, if you're familiar with me, I'm a huge fan of Zach Pope, and this is his favorite MCU film to this day. So I know what some of you are probably thinking right now.
How dare you!
So hear me out before you have a go at me in the comments below. And plus, I'm pretty sure my cousin is not going to like this, as, again, this is her favorite MCU film. Now, like I said, the Guardians of the Galaxy films have been to me what the Thor films have been to a lot of people. So if the second one was my Thor the Dark World, then this was my original Thor. And so I'm hoping Guardians 3 will be my Thor Ragnarok, and you know how much a lot of people love Ragnarok. But I'll say this, I think Guardians of the Galaxy is a really good film, just some things that hold it back from being great in my opinion. Now, I do think because you have only 5 characters introduced, it's easier to remember all of them, and they give a better impression than in Eternals. However, there was one character that I felt was unnecessary in this film. Drax. I felt like he was just put there because they felt they needed a power man, this guy with brawn and strength. Even though I felt Groot could have fit the bill, I think just having Star-Lord, Gamora, Rocket, and Groot was fine. There was no need for Drax. And it didn't help that he did an incredibly stupid thing just to advance the plot, where he called Ronan to his location just so that he could face him. Now, would I say it was more stupid than what Rocket did in the second film? No, because at least he was doing it out of anger and revenge, where Rocket was just doing it to be an a-hole. With that said, I think there could have been some smarter ways to do it, like he could have hijacked a ship and flown across the galaxy. Surely he could have found Ronan. But that's a shame, because otherwise I think Guardians 1 is a very good film. It's a very funny film, excellent CGI. Chris Pratt and Zoe Saldana stole every scene they were in. And Rocket was somewhat smart in this film, especially when he tells Drax off for trying to take on an army by himself. And there is a lot of great heart, like Gamora and Star-Lord's tragic backstories I think were very interesting. But like I said, Drax I think holds this film down for me, hence why I can't really rank it higher. Number 22. Iron Man 2. This is another one where people were like, wait, where is it? Surely it can't be higher than all these other films. But in my opinion, I've always enjoyed Iron Man 2 a lot. I really like it. I kind of love it, actually. And while, yes, it is the weakest of the 3 Iron Man films, I think it's a really good and very enjoyable film. It is very funny, and the comedy I felt was very earned, and every character had a nice amount of chemistry with each other. I sympathized with Tony's struggles throughout the movie, and I liked how they further showed his intelligence when he created a new element. I thought that was genius. And sure, Whiplash wasn't the most memorable villain, but he's not the worst, and I think I understood his motivations very well. Obviously, like I said, the chemistry between Robert Downey Jr.'s Tony Stark and Gwyneth Paltrow's Pepper Potts were absolutely on fire. The action sequences, even if there aren't as many as most people wanted, they still were fantastic, especially between Iron Man and War Machine, which I thought. I will admit, I have a lot of hard time deciding who I prefer as Rhodey, Terrence Howard, or Don Cheadle. But I think they're both great, and I enjoy Don Cheadle in this one as well. So for me, I think Iron Man 2 is severely overhated, and I don't think the plot is as messy as some people make it out to be. I followed it just fine, honestly, and it had a central theme surrounding the film. Number 21. Captain America the Winter Soldier. Now, this is another pick on my list that a lot of people are not going to like, because Captain America the Winter Soldier is a lot of people's favorite MCU film. Me, I think it's a tad bit overrated. I would actually say second to Guardians of the Galaxy is the second most overrated film in the MCU. But with that said, I do think it's a really good film. The thing that holds it back from being higher on the list is the fact that for a film called The Winter Soldier, there isn't as much Winter Soldier in the film. also it doesn't hit those emotional moments as my top 20 do. But other than that, and it's a shame because if it weren't for the fact that there was a lack of the Winter Soldier in the film, despite what the title implied, in fact, if the subtitle was called Captain America Hail Hydra, I think this film might have actually been one of the best, one of the top 10. But otherwise, I think this movie is really good, almost great. The action, I think, is still some of the best hand to hand combat in the MCU. Chris Evans and Scarlett Johansson had amazing chemistry and banter. You just loved every scene they were in. The humor all landed. There are now iconic moments like when Steve, during the third act, tells Bucky he's with him till the end of the line. Sure, it gets a bit cartoonish in the third act, but I still enjoyed it. And the clash between what is the right thing to do between Captain America and Nick Fury was handled really well and further shows just how pure of heart Steve truly is. So I wouldn't begrudge anyone if Winter Soldier was your favorite. Just don't be a jerk to anyone who doesn't. I think it's really good, almost great. Number 20. Avengers Age of Ultron. Now, every film from here on out, I can say with full confidence that I love. So yes, contrary to a lot of people, I love Avengers Age of Ultron. I think it's severely underrated. Yes, it is the weakest of the four Avengers films, and I think it will forever remain the weakest. Though I'll get back to you on that on the Kang Dynasty. But with that said, I still think this is an amazing film. What I really love about it is that it's very character driven. The character interactions were amazing, and it was a great way to learn more about Hawkeye and Black Widow, who might have felt a little bit underutilized in the previous films. Mark Ruffalo crushed it in his performance as Bruce Banner, and he really showed a vulnerable side, even more so than before, I argue. And so what if there's a lot of comedy? Personally, I don't care as long as it all lands, and in my opinion, all the comedy landed. And there are still a lot of emotional scenes that, in my opinion, landed for me. It had a grittier feel, and I liked it. I think it was earned. I love Scarlet Witch and Quicksilver. May Quicksilver rest in peace. It's a shame we didn't get more films with him. And sure, the plot can be a little messier, but like I said, it's more character driven. And you know what? I think Ultron's a pretty smart villain, and the action, I'd say, still holds up very well. So, Age of Ultron would be a film that I strongly defend. I love this film. Number 19. Iron Man 3. As you can tell, Iron Man 3 has had a pretty major bump up since my last MCU ranking, because I thought that this film was a great and heartwarming way to conclude the Iron Man trilogy. I love this so much. This movie showed how far Tony has come, where he learned to rely on his quick thinking, improvisation, and intelligence rather than on his suit. And I think the darker tone worked for the more psychological story this movie was trying to tell, and it showed us that Tony is Iron Man with or without the Iron Man suit. And I know some people may criticize this film for having more Tony than Iron Man, but for me, they've always been one and the same, so I don't mind that. And I love this film because it gives a clear picture of what it really means to be a hero, what it really means to be Iron Man. And honestly, I actually found the Mandarin twist to be very funny and worked well within the context of this film. Plus, after Shang-Chi, I think it's even easier to forgive this film for that. I also loved Tony's interactions with Rhodey, with Pepper, and with Harley Keener. I really wish we see more Harley Keener in the MCU. So, Iron Man 3, I think, is severely underrated, and I will defend it strongly. Number 18. Captain America the First Avenger. In my opinion, Captain America the First Avenger is not only the second most underrated MCU movie, but is honestly one of the most underrated superhero films of all time. I love this movie for not being afraid to show us just what of a good person and how pure of heart and optimistic Captain America truly is. We honestly need more heroes like him. Take notes more recent Superman films. Alan Silvestri's score for the movie is absolutely beautiful and underrated, and is to Captain America what John Williams' Superman theme is to Superman, in my opinion. This is just such an inspiring movie. The way Steve works his way up the ranks of the military so that he's out there, saving lives and protecting people, perfectly showed how even when people above him tell him otherwise, he will never stop doing the right thing. The way this movie is shot makes it really feel like the 1940s. I love the cinematography. Not to mention great supporting characters in Peggy Carter, Bucky Barnes, Howard Stark, etc. And Red Skull was a great villain as he mirrored Captain America, showing how he could have become if Steve didn't remember his morals. So Captain America the First Avenger I think should be more appreciated for this. Number 17. Thor. This is actually my pick for the most underrated MCU movie. Director Kenneth Branagh made an amazing movie that was grandiose, bombastic, with a lot of great heart and humor. Chris Hemsworth absolutely kills it as Thor, bringing a character that is otherworldly, but also one that we can sympathize with. Throughout this film, Thor learns humility, love, what it really means to be worthy, what it means to be a leader, and to be less arrogant and realize he's not above all. I actually really loved the relationship between Thor and Jane because their relationship felt organic and helped each other become better people. Jane went from seeing Thor as important research that can prove her right to seeing him as a person who understands her and gives her hope that things can get better, while Thor went from seeing her as a mere mortal beneath him, leading her to help him reunite with his hammer, to seeing her as someone who taught him that other lives matter. This comes together beautifully when he welcomes the warriors free, when they had come to rescue him, and when he apologizes to Loki, asking him to take his life, earning his powers back. Also, Loki was a perfect foil to Thor, and the other supporting characters were great additions too. I actually think the Warriors 3 are kind of underrated. So Thor will be a film that I will strongly defend. I think it is one of the most underrated superhero films ever. Probably top 3 most underrated superhero films. Number 16. Black Widow. To be perfectly honest with all of you, I never understood the overwhelming hate that Black Widow got. This is a story about reconciling with one's family and facing one's past with courage. And I think that is actually a very beautiful story. And I see some people say that this is not the film that it should have been. I'm like, what do you mean? Did you go in with a checklist of what this film had to be? Because that never works, people. Never. Look at Sonic 06 or Power Rangers Megaforce or Star Wars The Last Jedi. Never do that, please. And honestly, there has never been an opening to a movie, or at least the first 10 minutes, that had me in tears more than this one. And, okay, I'll admit, I agree. Taskmaster was completely wasted and a little underwhelming because he is one of the coolest villains in the Marvel Comics. But I think I can understand somewhat of the context. I just felt he could have been more. Plus, I thought this movie was funny and sad at the same time, and that is something I love about Pixar and Marvel Studios. They like to make you laugh and cry kind of at the same time sometimes. And honestly, seeing Natasha make amends with her parents was super heartwarming, and her sister Yelena was just such a joyful delight on screen, and she's honestly my second favorite new character introduced in the MCU after Kate Bishop. Plus, I love Yelena and I appreciate her more, even more, after Hawkeye, so there's that. And the banter and dynamic between Natasha and Yelena was super heartfelt. So I think Black Widow is honestly overhated. Number 15. Captain Marvel. Speaking of overhated films, I would say Captain Marvel might be the second most overhated film in the entire MCU, and honestly, one of the most overhated films in the entire superhero genre. And I know a lot of people take issue with Brie Larson and whatnot, but honestly, I would say Brie Larson is the Captain Marvel, while Christopher Reeve is the Superman. And I really enjoyed her performance as much as I did Samuel L. Jackson as Nick Fury. I thought the chemistry and banter between those two was fantastic. I really loved the road trip buddy cop banter between them. And I personally loved this story because Carol was in the dark about who she was, and we were learning more about her at the same time as she was. And I know that isn't for everyone. Some people say giving her amnesia made her kind of unlikable because, and well, I can somewhat understand that as some people might fail to connect it with her at first. But like I said, we were learning more about her as she was learning more about herself, so it allowed me to connect with her. And seriously, apparently having amnesia makes you more unlikable than stealing batteries for the stupidest reasons ever. Yeah, I'm not letting Rocket go on that. But I think it also helps us to put ourselves in her shoes, giving Carol a compelling journey in this film. And another thing I think was very compelling, or at least for me, was that she was learning what real friendship was. She was kind of desperate to see the Kree as her friends. Then she realized what real friendship was thanks to Monica, Maria, and Nick Fury. Not to mention, and which gave us some very heartfelt and inspiring moments. And honestly, I'll be honest, I like snarky people, and I liked how snarky and sassy Carol was. So, yeah, I think Captain Marvel was the most overhated MCU film until a certain film that came out 3 years after this one. Number 14. Shang-Chi and the Legend of the Ten Rings. Now, despite the divisiveness of Phase 4 of the MCU, I think Shang-Chi is something most of us can agree is fantastic. That's what I think of Shang-Chi. Not only is it an amazing love letter to Asian culture, but it's just such a great story and an excellent origin story for Shang-Chi. Excellent martial arts choreography, and someone who likes a lot of martial arts like Ninja Turtles and Power Rangers, I feel they should take cues from Shang-Chi the next time they try and do a live action film based on those properties. Not to mention, the locations and visuals are absolutely outstanding and beautiful. Simu Liu not only excelled in his presentation of his martial arts skills, but was also convincing in his performance, giving Shang-Chi a great story about him, his sister, and his father dealing with the loose ends in their family and deal with their family history and tragedy. It's just such a wonderful story and it has a lot of heart. I actually think it does the father son stuff better than Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2 just because you got scenes, yes, his father was being very manipulative and basically turned him into a weapon, but he also cared about his family and he was a great villain, and Shang-Chi was a great protagonist. I can't wait. I need more Shang-Chi in the MCU, sooner rather than later. Bravo, David Daniel Creighton. Number 13. Ant-Man. As you can probably tell, I've been a bigger fan of the Ant-Man movies than most people online. I just think this is such a fun film, and it's pretty underrated. Sure, it's quite light-hearted, but I don't think that's a bad thing. And after Avengers Age of Ultron being very emotionally heartbreaking at times and quite dark, I think I was in for a good laugh and a bit more of a palate cleanser. I think Paul Rudd is hilarious as Scott Lang, and his battle with Falcon was my favorite Falcon scene up to this point in the MCU. But at the same time, this movie doesn't miss out on the heartfelt moments either. This movie makes you sympathize with Scott, understanding how he just wants to see his daughter Cassie more often. He wants to be there for her, which, in my opinion, makes him a good father, even if he is a thief, but he has a good heart. I'd also say this film is about family and redemption. Two very compelling themes, in my opinion. So I think Ant-Man should be more appreciated, if you ask me. Number 12. Black Panther. If Shang-Chi was a love letter to Asian culture, then I'd say Black Panther is a sensational love letter to African culture. Throughout this movie, T'Challa learns what it really means to be a king to one's people. And I think that is a very thematical and mature message because it questions who is our family, who is our community, who is our neighbor. And honestly, the mid-credit scene where T'Challa announces that they're going to open Wakanda to the rest of the world and they must find a way to work with one another as if they're one big tribe, I think it's one of the best mid-credit scenes in MCU or superhero movie history. Chadwick Boseman, may he rest in peace. I'm still honestly not over his passing. Gives an outstanding performance as T'Challa and Black Panther, and is surrounded by an excellent supporting cast. Letitia Wright in particular was a standout as Shuri. She was probably my favorite of the supporting characters. And Michael B. Jordan really held his own as Killmonger. He was a great villain and a great foil for T'Challa. Because, well, T'Challa ended up winning the physical battle. I'd say Killmonger won the moral battle in the end because he does change Wakanda for the better, if you ask me. Again, leading to that mid-credit scene I was talking about. I think the action, sure, some of the CGI is a little rubbery, but I think the action is great. I also think the music is phenomenal, the locations are phenomenal. It's just a wonderful movie with now iconic superhero movie moments and just a wonderful story, if you ask me. Number 11. Captain America Civil War. Now, there are two movies on this list in which I had to really question Kevin Feige and say, are you sure this is a good idea when he first announced it? And Captain America Civil War is the first one we're going to be talking about. Because, if you ask me, on paper, this movie could have been an overcrowded mess that saw Captain America, the titular character, mind you, overshadowed by other characters, and it could have easily just felt more like an Avengers movie disguised as a Captain America movie. But in execution, thanks to the great direction of the Russo brothers, it didn't turn out that way. And I'm so thankful it is. This is first and foremost a Captain America movie. Yeah, the other Avengers are there, not to mention the fantastic introductions of both Black Panther and Spider-Man in the MCU. But Captain America himself still feels like the central character of the film. And I think the story is basically told from his eyes. You mostly see from his eyes, which allows you to see why he's doing what he's doing and where he's coming from. Not to mention, it brings the whole Captain America trilogy full circle. But it also allows you to see things from Iron Man's perspective because he's the second main character, if you ask me. And I guess after seeing Civil War, I can understand why there wasn't as much Winter Soldier in Captain America the Winter Soldier, because the Russo brothers split the Winter Soldier storyline into two films. And the Winter Soldier storyline in Civil War was very effective in here. And I'm so glad he got a lot of screen time, Bucky. Not to mention, Steve trying to protect his best friend, Bucky, while simultaneously trying not to lose his other best friend, Tony, as well as being determined to stick to what he truly believes is the right thing to do, was a very compelling story. And that airport battle was basically every fan's dream come true of seeing all the heroes fight each other, but you can tell they didn't want to hurt each other. But I think everything comes full circle in the third act, where it's revealed that Bucky was the one that killed Tony's parents, and that is ultimately what broke the Avengers apart. It was an emotional, climactic battle, and it's still emotional to me. That I would still say this has one of the best third act battles in the MCU. I thoroughly love and adore Captain America's Civil War, and I'm sure a lot of people probably, well, might have this one higher, agree that this deserves to be in the top 15. Number 10. The Avengers. What can I even say about The Avengers that hasn't been said already for the past 11 years now? Boy, do I feel old. This is such an epic movie, and it's still such a joy to watch. The banter between the six Avengers was absolutely on point, and how they had interacted with each other, bringing their dynamics and differences, was excellent. Samuel Jackson and Tom Hiddleston were having a blast as Nick Fury and Loki, respectively. You enjoyed every scene they were in. And there are now iconic superhero moments, like when the Avengers are all getting ready to battle and the camera is paneling around them in a 360 rotation. That is epic. Mark Ruffalo winning so many people over and making them interested in the Hulk. This is the film that made people interested in the Hulk. No offense to Edward Norton or Eric Bana, but Mark Ruffalo is my personal favorite Bruce Banner and Hulk. I think he just brings such a sense of energy and personality that I don't think the other interpretations really did too well. That's just me, honestly. And Joss Whedon did his utmost to give each character their own epic moment in equal time. Even Hawkeye, who, while isn't given as much screen time as the other five Avengers, he is still given his own iconic moments, like when he's leaping off a building, turns around, and shoots above him. That was awesome. This film, I could go on about how amazing it is, but it's been said already. Number 9. Spider-Man Homecoming. Now, I talked about this a lot when I re-ranked the Spider-Man movies back in September, but I'm not afraid to say my praises for this movie again. This is just such a great coming-of-age story, managing to be both a refreshing experience that separates it from the other Spider-Man films before it, not to mention, heck, even from the previous MCU films before it, but also it still captures the essence of who Spider-Man is beautifully. And I think it gives us an amazing Spider-Man experience. I really love Peter's arc in this film, learning that he is Spider-Man with or without the suit. Because that's what this film was trying to do. Answer the question, what does it mean to be Spider-Man? Do you need to have the iconic red and blue suit that we're used to in other medias and in the comics? Or can it just be from the heart? And he learns that his determination to stand up and do the right thing is that what makes him Spider-Man. And I thought that was well told and compelling. And I think that was perfectly illustrated in the scene where he leaves Liz at the homecoming dance to stop her father, the Vulture. Speaking of which, forget Morbius for a second. Michael Keaton is still top 10 best MCU villains as the Vulture for me. He was terrifying, but also sympathetic, and I loved how he mirrored Peter. Tom Holland, fantastic casting as Peter Parker and Spider-Man. I just love this film, and I think it's one of the most rewatchable films in both Spider-Man history and MCU history. Number 8. Iron Man. In my opinion, the original Iron Man might be the most universally beloved comic book movie ever made. You'd probably have to look hard and long just to find someone who doesn't like this film. Because not only was this the film that started the MCU, but I think it still holds up incredibly and has just so much heart. From the perfect casting of Robert Downey Jr. as Tony Stark and Iron Man, to the amazing chemistry Downey has with everyone. From the wittiness of the script to the heartfelt story that shows that while Tony Stark is a cocky man, deep down, he cares about the safety of others and is willing to turn his life around in order to ensure he's doing the right thing, even if it means putting his life at risk. And that was a wonderful beginning to his character arc that would go on for 3 phases. This movie is just, there's just something so special about the original Iron Man. And I think it's going to get higher and higher as in the future. Number 7. Thor Ragnarok. This movie was just a blast to watch. The action was super exciting, the comedy was firing on all cylinders, especially the get help scene, while simultaneously giving us also some very powerful heartfelt moments. Honestly, despite all the amazing comedy, my favorite scene in the entire film is honestly when Thor has a vision of his father, all bruised and bleeding, breaking down about he's not as strong as his father was, and then his father telling him he's stronger. And Hela was an intimidating villain. Mark Ruffalo, Tom Hiddleston, Tessa Thompson, and Idris Elba were all great supporting characters. But I think most of you know why For Ragnarok is this great. And sure, some people can take issue with some of the comedy going too far. And I will admit, with the death of the Warriors 3 kind of being played off as a bit of a joke, I will see what some people say. But other than that, I just love For Ragnarok. Number 6. Ant-Man and the Wasp. Now, because this is often considered by many people as a low tier MCU film, you need to understand at least two reasons why this film is so high up for me and why I love it so much. Well, I think the first one is obvious. After being emotionally broken by Avengers Infinity War, I needed a good laugh, and Ant-Man and the Wasp really provided that. It was a great palate cleanser to something dark as Infinity War. But as well as that, and this goes into my second reason, the scholastic year of 2017 to 2018, which was before Ant-Man and the Wasp came out, was a nightmare for me. I had such a horrible year at school to the point where I didn't even go back to that school the following year. So again, I needed something a bit more of a good laugh to and a bit of escapism. And again, Ant-Man and the Wasp provided that. But at the same time, these Ant-Man movies are not just cheap wastes of time. They have a lot of heart, and this one's no exception. My favorite scene in this film would probably be where Cassie goes up to her dad and tells him that he can do anything, giving him emotional support. I love that scene. And the rest of the film is an absolute blast to watch. It's extremely funny. The chemistry between Paul Rudd and Evangeline Lilly was great. I finally got to see the Wasp on the big screen. Finally, that was something of a dream come true, especially watching Avengers Earth's Mightiest Heroes as a kid and loving the Wasp in that. Ghost, I actually think, is an underrated villain with understandable motivations. It annoys me hearing that she's been cut out of the Thunderbolts apparently. Scott tries to earn both Hank and Hope's trust back, I think was a great arc for him. And like I said, I loved the scene between Scott and his daughter Cassie. I thought it was very heartfelt. So I am very defensive about Ant-Man and the Wasp. I love this movie so much. It means so much to me. Number 5. Thor Love and Thunder. That's right, guys. In my opinion, Thor Love and Thunder is the most overhated film in the entire MCU. And I will strongly defend this one. I don't care what you all say. The reason why I love Love and Thunder so much is because it took everything I loved about the original Thor and everything I loved about Ragnarok and combined it into two. That's what I love about it. Yes, it is a very comedic film, but honestly, I think a lot of the comedy lands. Yeah, the screaming goats were a little annoying after some time, but that's basically it. And you know how I said with Ragnarok my one gripe was with how the Warriors 3 were killed, which made it feel like Waititi was trying to do away with Thor's past? Well, that's not an issue here. I felt Valkyrie worked really well with Jane, Korg worked really well with Jane, and Sif was well respected, and I really like this one. Also, at its core, it has a lot of heart, and I feel that's what people forget. It's about purpose. Gore the God Butcher, yeah, he doesn't butcher gods as much as people may have wanted to see, but come on, I'll take what I can get. Plus, he's not the focus of the film. Thor is, and I think a lot of what was done with him and what was done with Jane worked. And for people who are still mad at me for having this way above the Guardians of the Galaxy movies, you're all probably thinking,
what did his play have that mine didn't?
Now, first off, I think Guardians 2 alone is sillier than Thor Ragnarok and Love and Thunder combined. Second, here's what Love and Thunder has that the Guardians films don't. Nobody to do something incredibly stupid to get the plot either moving forward or advancing. That's what it has. Also, it sticks to that heart, and as much as I enjoy the Star-Lord Gamora relationship and Zoe Saldana as Gamora, I think it works better here. You have the characters have their conflicts, but also you have them having sweet romantic moments, like when Jane and Thor are searching for the missing kids and they talk about her cancer and Thor's being serious about it and saying, I'm going to help you. And when she's in hospital at New Asgard, he said, he's going to do everything he can to keep her alive. And it makes her, spoiler alert, death at the end feel paid off, if you ask me. So look, if you don't like Fallen Thunder, fine, I can't stop you, but honestly, you can't take away how much I love this movie. Number 4. Avengers Infinity War. I think most people will agree with me that Infinity War belongs to be in the top 4. I mean, talk about an emotional roller coaster. While there is a lot of humor, and it all lands in my opinion, every emotional scene hits hard, and the way this movie opens perfectly sets up the tone of the movie. Thanos was a great and understanding villain, like one of the best comic book movie villains in my opinion. Robert Downey Jr., Chris Hemsworth, Zoe Saldana, and the rest, but especially those three, all crushed it in their performance, with moments that really had me in tears. And that ending, man. I mean, that's basically all I can say about Infinity War. It's just such an amazing film. Great action, great character moments. But I do think there are 3 better films. Number 3. Spider-Man Far From Home. Now, these top 3 are basically tied for different reasons, but tied nonetheless. While I did in fact talk about how much I love Far From Home in my ranking of the Spider-Man movies, again, I'm not afraid to say it all again. Not only was this a beautiful epilogue to Avengers Endgame and the Infinity Saga as a whole, but I thought it was such a great story. It had an excellent and super compelling character arc for Peter, where he learned he shouldn't worry about being as good of a hero as others like Iron Man, Captain America, or Thor, but to be a good hero in his own right. That is the theme of this film. Self-doubt and developing self-confidence in himself. The action sequences are out of this world, especially the illusion scene. I still maintain these are some of the best action sequences in the entire MCU. The comedy in this movie was all on point, I'd say, but at the same time, the emotional scenes hit me really hard, where I kind of wanted to cry at times, especially during when Mysterio was psychologically challenging Peter in the illusion scene, because that was kind of scary but also amazing at the same time. This led Peter to being broken after the illusion, filled with guilt for trusting Mysterio, and him learning to overcome that self-doubt in him. And I know some people say the story is a plot hole in its own right because Tony gave highly advanced glasses to a teenager who'd been dead for 5 years without instructions. But for me, Tony has always been reckless, and he has proven to trust Peter. He believed he could trust Peter a lot, so I could debunk that quickly. Especially, there is a scene where Happy literally tells Peter that Tony was his best friend, and he was a mess. He second-guessed everything he did, and he was all over the place. The one thing he didn't second-guess was picking Peter. So I hope that debunks what some people say is a plot hole in this film. As you can see, I get very defensive about Far From Home. Don't at me. I just love this movie so much. Number 2. Avengers Endgame. This movie was just such a phenomenal experience, and that's how I describe this movie. Phenomenal. This movie is 3 hours, and yet it just feels only like 30 minutes, wrapping up the Infinity Saga in such a beautiful way, giving us not only very funny moments, but extremely emotional character moments, such as when Morgan tells Tony her father, I love you 3000s, or when Tony goes, I am Iron Man. Snap. And a very tearful ending, if you ask me. And this was such a wonderful send-off to Iron Man and Captain America with some of the most epic moments I've seen in any superhero movie. I mean, you got to admit, that final third act battle where all of the heroes are uniting to take on Thanos' army to save the universe, that was just epic. This movie was so epic that I thought it would take a long time before another movie would top either Avengers Endgame or Spider-Man Far From Home. But then one movie came along and it changed all that. Number 1. Spider-Man No Way Home. This was the other movie on this list that I was telling you about where I had to kind of question Kevin Feige alongside Captain America Civil War going, is this the right idea? Because on paper, this movie could have just been a mess of just hollow fan service. But what we got with No Way Home was one of the most emotional roller coasters I have ever seen in such a fantastic way. Maybe even more so than Endgame itself. I mean, Peter, the theme of this film is sacrifice, and he learns that he has to make the ultimate sacrifice and lose everything he holds dear to his heart for the greater good and safety of the entire multiverse, his home, and everyone that he loves. And that really had me in tears. Adding to the numerous emotional gut punches, do I need to go on about Aunt May's death or that goodbye kiss between Peter and MJ? The other Peters, Andrew and Toby, I felt were used well and were more than just fan service without them overshadowing Tom Holland's Peter and his journey throughout the movie. They were only there in the third act, yet they still had an impact on the film without overshadowing the main Peter Parker. They were secondary characters used appropriately, and I was all in favor of that. Heck, just thinking of this movie sometimes has me in tears. It's kind of like Logan. And you could say that the John Watts Spider-Man trilogy is, to me, what the Captain America trilogy is to a lot of people, where it gets better and better every film. So yeah, you could say Far From Home is my Winter Soldier, and No Way Home is my Civil War. And I really believe that No Way Home deserves to have my pick for the #1 best MCU film. So there you have it, true believers. That is my ranking of all 29 MCU movies that I have seen so far. I know I haven't seen Wakanda Forever yet, and I'm sorry that I haven't. Hopefully, by the next time I do one of these, I will have seen that and Ant-Man and the Wasp: Quantumania. And I know a lot of people aren't going to like that I ranked the Guardians of the Galaxy movies so low. But until then, let me know in the comments section what your ranking of the MCU movies is. And if you like this video, you can leave a like. And if you don't, you can leave a dislike. And if you like my content, you can subscribe to this channel. I talk Marvel, Ninja Turtles, Sonic the Hedgehog, Power Rangers. So if that's anything up your alley, this is the place for you. And if you're already subscribed, make sure you're still subscribed in case YouTube may have randomly unsubscribed you since the last time you were here. Hopefully I'll be back really soon. Until then, trust your own judgment. Sodium285, out.
If the world chooses to become my enemy, I will fight like I always have.